Most ranger stations are built to keep people safe, but sometimes they record things that shouldn't be happening at all. These are 3 disturbing stories from remote ranger stations. The first strange thing about the ranger station was the logbook entries that didn't match any ranger on duty, and I only noticed because my name was signed on a shift I hadn't looked. Out in a remote stretch of high desert in Nevada, where the nearest town sat almost 80 miles away, and radio reception barely held together during clear weather, let alone the kind of dust storm that had rolled through the night before I arrived. And at first I figured it was just a paperwork mistake, because that happens more often than people think, especially at understaffed ranger stations where shifts overlap and records get messy. But the timestamp next to my name was exact, down to the minute, and it noted a routine patrol I never took, including a vehicle check at mile marker 12 on an access road that had actually been closed for over a year. And that was the first moment I felt something wasn't right. Not dangerous yet, just off, like stepping into a room where someone had just left but you didn't hear the door close. So I went outside to check the truck assigned to that shift, expecting to find it untouched. But the odometer had extra miles on it. Fresh dust layered unevenly along the sides, and the engine was still slightly warm, despite no one being scheduled before me that morning. And I remember standing there with the keys in my hand, trying to convince myself maybe one of the off-duty rangers borrowed it, even though that portrays the concept unfaded, which hadn't been done, and that's when the radio crackled behind me. Just a burst of static at first, then a voice that cut through in short fragments, too distorted to fully understand, but clear enough to recognize the tone of someone trying to stay calm, repeating coordinates that didn't match any known trail or access road in our region. And I rushed back inside, grabbed the mic, and responded. But there was no reply, just silence again. And when I rewound the recording system to replay the transmission, there was nothing there at all. No static, no voice, just dead air, like it never happened. And I would have let it go if it wasn't for what I found about an hour later, when I drove out to mile marker 12 just to settle my nerves, even though that road was technically closed, because the barrier had been moved aside, not broken, not damaged, just neatly repositioned, like someone had driven through and put it back, and the tracks in the sand were fresh, deeper than normal, like the vehicle had been heavily loaded. And they led off the road entirely into open desert, where there were no marked trails, just endless flat terrain broken by scattered rock formations, and I followed them longer than I should have, telling myself I'd turn back at the next ridge. But every time I crested one, the tracks continued, steady, deliberate, until I spotted something in the distance that didn't belong, a structure that wasn't on any map, low and partially buried, like a storage unit or a prefab shelter. And parked beside it was a ranger vehicle identical to ours, same model, same markings. But the number on the side didn't exist in our fleet records. And that's when the radio came alive again, louder this time, clearer, and the voice said my name. Not over the main channel, but through the emergency frequency that only activates during distress calls, telling me to leave immediately, repeating it over and over with increasing urgency, and I froze, because the voice sounded like me. Same cadence, same tone, just slightly off, like a recording played back through a damaged speaker, and I don't remember deciding to leave. I just know I was suddenly back in the truck, driving fast enough to kick up a trail of dust behind me. Heart pounding harder than it ever had on any call. And when I got back to the station, I checked the logbook again, and there was a new entry beneath the one with my name, written in the same handwriting, time-stamped just minutes earlier, stating that the patrol at mile marker 12 had been completed, and no anomalies were found. And that was the moment I realized whatever had taken that truck before me had also come back, and it had already written the report before I even returned. The ranger station sat deep in a dense stretch of Appalachian forest, the kind where sunlight barely reaches the ground even at noon. And the first time I realized something was wrong was when a distress call came through our emergency line, reporting an injured hiker from a trail that had been permanently closed for nearly 5 years. And I remember staring at the coordinates on the screen, thinking it had to be outdated GPS data or someone reading from an old map, because that trail had been shut down after a landslide wiped out half the path and made the rest unstable. But the caller sounded real, panicked, breathing hard, saying they couldn't move and needed help immediately, repeating the same coordinates over and over. And the strange part was the signal strength. It was strong. Too strong for that area where reception usually cuts out entirely. And I asked for landmarks, anything nearby, but the caller just kept repeating the coordinates like they were reading them off something, and then the line went silent mid-sentence. No disconnect tone, just dead air, and I waited a few seconds before trying to call back, but the number came back as unregistered. No record, no carrier, nothing. And at that point protocol said, we still had to respond, because even a false call could mean someone actually needed help. So I grabbed my pack, checked the gear, and headed out. Just as the light started fading, because in that part of the forest, darkness comes faster than you expect, especially under thick canopy. And the trailhead to the closed route was overgrown but still visible if you knew where to look. With an old warning sign barely hanging from one post, faded lettering that most hikers would miss unless they were specifically looking for it. And as I stepped onto the trail, the air felt different, heavier, quieter. Like the forest itself was holding its breath, and I kept my radio on, expecting another call or at least some background chatter from the station, but all I got was intermittent static, the kind that cuts in and out without pattern. And about 20 minutes in, I found the first thing that didn't make sense. Fresh footprints in the dirt, clear impressions like someone had passed through recently, heading deeper into the closed area. And they weren't hiking boots. More like lightweight sneakers, which didn't match the terrain at all, especially not for someone injured. And I followed them, because they aligned with the coordinates I'd been given. But they didn't show any signs of struggle, no dragging, no uneven steps, just a steady pace. And that's when my radio crackled again, and the same voice came through, calmer this time, almost controlled, repeating the coordinates once more, but adding something new, telling me I was close, even though I hadn't transmitted my position at all. And I stopped walking right there because that meant whoever was speaking could see me, and I scanned the trees, the slope, the ridgeline ahead, but there was nothing, just dense forest in every direction. And I asked them where they were, told them to make any kind of noise, but the response didn't match the question. It just repeated the same line, like a loop, and then cut out again. And I kept moving, because turning back didn't feel like an option anymore, not with the possibility that someone could actually be out there. And after another 10 minutes, the trail opened up slightly, where the landslide had occurred. A wide stretch of exposed dirt and broken rock, and right in the middle of it was a backpack, sitting upright, like it had been placed there deliberately. Not dropped, not tossed, just set down. And I approached slowly, checking for movement, calling out, but there was no response. And when I opened it, everything inside was dry, clean, organized. No signs of damage or wear, like it hadn't been used on a hike at all. And tucked into the front pocket was a folded piece of paper with the same coordinates written on it, over and over, covering the entire page. Different handwriting styles, layered on top of each other, like multiple people had written the same thing, again and again. And that's when my radio came alive for the third time. But this time it wasn't just the voice, it was multiple voices overlapping, all repeating the same coordinates in slightly different tones. And one of them was clearly mine. And I dropped the paper right there because something about hearing my own voice mixed in with the others made it impossible to stay calm. And I backed away from the backpack, turning slowly, trying to retrace my steps. But the trail behind me didn't look the same anymore. The path seemed narrower, the trees closer together, like the forest had shifted while I wasn't looking, and I picked a direction and started moving faster, ignoring the radio completely now, just focusing on getting back to the station. And it took longer than it should have, much longer, because by the time I finally reached the trailhead, it was fully dark. And the warning sign that had been hanging loose earlier was now fixed upright, looking almost new, like it hadn't been touched in years. And when I got back to the station, exhausted and covered in dirt, I went straight to the logbook to report what happened. But there was already an entry written for that shift, time-stamped about 30 minutes before I returned, stating that a distress call had been received from a closed trail, investigated, and confirmed to be a false alarm, with no evidence found, and signed at the bottom, with my name, in handwriting that looked exactly like mine, except for one detail I couldn't ignore. The coordinates written in the report didn't match the ones I had followed. They were slightly different, leading somewhere deeper into the forest, where no trail had ever existed. The ranger station was built on the edge of a massive national park in northern Montana, miles from the nearest maintained road. And the only reason I was there that week was because the main team had rotated out early after reporting equipment issues that nobody fully explained. And I didn't think much of it at first because remote stations always have problems. Generators fail, radios cut out, cameras glitch. But the first night I realized this was different was when every single trail camera feed went offline at the exact same time. Not gradually, not one by one. Just a complete blackout across the entire system. And I remember staring at the monitor wall, waiting for at least one feed to come back, but nothing did. Just blank screens and a single error message repeating over and over saying signal lost. And that alone wasn't enough to worry me because storms can knock out signals. But there hadn't been any storm, the sky was completely clear. And when I checked the system logs, that's when things started to feel wrong, because the shutdown wasn't caused by a loss of connection. It was triggered manually, as if someone had accessed each camera one by one and disabled them. And the timestamps were all within seconds of each other, too fast for a single person to physically move between locations. And that's when I noticed something else in the logs. Access credentials that didn't belong to anyone currently assigned to the station. A ranger ID that had been deactivated over 2 years ago after the person left the service. And I double-checked it just to be sure, but the name was still there in the system, tied to every single camera shutdown. And that's when the radio gave a short burst of static, followed by a voice requesting a status check from my station. And I answered immediately, giving my ID and confirming I was alone on site. But the response didn't match protocol. It just repeated my own words back to me, slightly delayed, like an echo but clearer, more deliberate. And then it added something I hadn't said. A request for confirmation that the perimeter sweep had been completed, which wasn't part of any standard procedure we used, and I asked them to identify themselves. But the line went dead, and I sat there for a few seconds trying to decide whether to report it or ignore it. And that's when the generator outside cut out completely, plunging the station into silence. Not darkness because the backup batteries kicked in, but the sudden quiet was noticeable. The constant hum just gone, and I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside to check it, expecting a mechanical issue. But the generator hadn't failed, it had been shut off manually. The switch flipped down cleanly, and the access panel was open, something that required a key I hadn't used since arriving. And I remember standing there scanning the tree line, realizing for the first time that someone else was out there, close enough to reach the station without me noticing. And I went back inside, locked the door, and checked the equipment room where spare gear was kept. And that's when I saw one of the handheld radios missing from its charging dock, the slot empty, the cable still warm like it had just been unplugged. And I picked up another unit and tried to reach anyone on the main channel. But all I got was static again, heavier this time, almost constant, and mixed into it were faint fragments of speech, too broken to understand but clearly human. And then I heard footsteps outside, slow, deliberate, circling the building, not trying to hide, just walking, stopping occasionally near the windows. And I turned off the interior lights, staying quiet, listening, trying to track the movement. And at one point the footsteps stopped right outside the door, and there was a single knock, not loud, just enough to be heard, followed by a pause, And then a voice came through the radio in my hand at the exact same moment, saying my name and telling me to open the door because the situation was under control. And the voice matched the one from earlier, the one repeating my own words. And I didn't move because nothing about that made sense. No ranger would approach a station like that without identifying themselves clearly. And the knock came again, slightly harder this time, and I stepped back, keeping my distance, watching the handle, expecting it to turn, but it didn't. And after a few seconds, the footsteps resumed, moving away from the door and around the side of the building, and I waited, listening until the sound faded into the trees, and then I checked the radio logs on the console, hoping to find some record of the transmission, but there was nothing. No incoming signal, no outgoing response, just empty logs like the system hadn't been used at all. And that's when I noticed a new entry appear on the activity screen. Not in the radio logs, but in the station access records, showing that the main door had been opened and closed twice within the last minute. And I stared at it because I hadn't unlocked or opened anything, and there was no sign of forced entry. And slowly I turned toward the door, checking the handle, still locked from the inside, exactly as I left it. And when I finally built up the nerve to check the external camera that covered the entrance, the feed was back online. Just that one camera, showing a clear view of the front of the station. And in the recording from a few moments earlier, the door opens by itself, swings outward, pauses for a second, and then closes again. And just before it shuts, you can see a figure standing there, wearing a ranger uniform identical to mine, reaching out and writing something on the clipboard mounted beside the door. And when I checked that clipboard in real life, there was a fresh entry added to the station log sheet, time-stamped it during the exact minute the door had supposedly opened, listing a completed perimeter sweep and signed with the name of the ranger whose ID had been used to shut down all the cameras, a person who, according to official records, hadn't set foot anywhere near that station in over 2 years.